My family called me a nobody right to my face at a fancy dinner, laughing like I was a joke. Then my brother's fiancée Googled my name and their jaws hit the floor when they saw who I really am. My name's Emily Carter, I'm 32 years old, and this story takes place around a dinner table that always felt more like a stage than a safe place. It was one of those picture-perfect nights in Westlake, Ohio. The table was dressed in white linen and crystal, the wine flowed like tradition, and the air was heavy with that kind of fake warmth that only family can pull off. I was sitting at the end of the table, my usual spot, close to the kitchen, far from the spotlight. To anyone else, it would have looked like a normal family gathering. But I knew better. I always knew better. My mom, Susan, with her flawless blowout and comments that hit like darts wrapped in sugar, was seated across from my dad, David, quiet, tired, more interested in his wine than anything I had to say. And then there was James, my older brother, the golden one, the one who could spill red wine on white carpet and somehow be praised for having passion. Everything he did was magical in their eyes, every word, every step, every mistake, somehow charming. And me? I was just Emily, the one who moved to New York for some office job as they called it, the daughter who never needed much and therefore never got much. I wasn't loud, I wasn't difficult, I just wasn't important to them. For years they talked about my life like it was a side note in the family story. Emily's in the city doing something with admin or marketing, right? That was how Mom explained it to neighbors. No one asked for details, no one ever dug deeper, because honestly, no one ever cared. They thought I was scraping by, probably sharing a tiny apartment, answering phones in some low-rise cubicle farm while James made 6 figures consulting, or whatever vague success he was into at the moment. And the thing is, I let them think that. I never corrected them. I never bragged. I just kept my life quiet. I stayed low, stayed kind, stayed polite. I smiled through dinners, sent birthday gifts on time, and clapped at James's engagements and promotions like it didn't hurt to be invisible. But that night changed everything. The tension started the way it always did. My mom making passive little digs like how I always wore comfortable shoes or how I didn't seem to stress about calories. My dad asking James for investment advice while pretending I didn't exist. James doing that thing where he laughed too loudly and waited for everyone to join in. And I played my part. I sat there, I smiled, I passed the bread. I didn't speak unless spoken to. But across the table was Laura, James's fiancée. She was new, shiny, curious. She hadn't yet learned the script. At first she was sweet, nervous, even. But then she started asking questions. "So Emily, what do you do again?" she asked genuinely, not mocking, just curious. I gave her the same answer I always give. I work in tech. That's it. Simple, safe. The kind of answer that usually makes people's eyes glaze over. But Laura didn't let it go. "What kind of tech?" she asked. And before I could brush it off, James cut in with a laugh. "Come on, Laura. Emily's not building rockets or anything. She probably just answers emails and calls it a day." Everyone laughed, even my mom, even my dad. It was casual cruelty, the kind they've mastered, and that's when it happened. Laura tilted her head, confused, then slowly pulled out her phone. She tapped in a few words, raised her eyebrows, and froze. I watched her face change. Her mouth opened slightly. Then she turned her phone around and showed James the screen. His eyes went wide. The color drained from his face. My mom leaned in, so did my dad. The room got quiet. Really quiet. Like you could hear the clock ticking quiet. Because staring back at them wasn't just my name, it was my company, my net worth, my TED Talk, my Forbes 30 Under 30 profile, my story. The one they never cared to ask about. The one I built in silence. And suddenly, the girl they thought was just Emily wasn't so invisible anymore. Growing up, I lived in the shadows of people who only saw light when it shined on James. Our house in Westlake looked perfect from the outside. Trimmed hedges, brick pathway, American flag swaying by the porch. But inside, it was a performance. Everything was about how things looked, not how they felt. My mom, Susan, had her nails done weekly and treated the neighborhood like an audience. She wasn't cruel, exactly, she was just curated, calculated. Everything had to be polished, controlled, show-ready. And James was her main act. 3 years older than me and born with the kind of charm people wrote about in yearbooks. He hit home runs, gave speeches, wore crowns at school dances. His bedroom walls were covered in plaques and medals, while mine held a calendar and a corkboard with my own scrawled goals. I don't think anyone even noticed. My dad, David, was the quieter one. A good man, maybe, deep down, but when it came to standing up to my mom or noticing me, he faded into the background. James would bring home a participation ribbon and Mom would frame it like it was Olympic gold. Me, I brought home silence. I remember being 8 and writing a story about a girl who could talk to animals. My teacher gave me an A+ and called it extraordinary. I was over the moon. I rushed home and waved that paper like a trophy. "Mom, Dad, look what I made!" My mom barely looked up from her mascara. "That's nice, Emily," she said, distracted. "We need to leave soon. James has his science fair." My dad nodded, his eyes already on his watch. "Leave it on the counter, sweetheart." I did. A few days later, I found it still there, coffee-stained and folded underneath a magazine. No one had read it. That was my childhood, over and over. Every win I had was silenced by James's next performance. Every moment I tried to shine, the spotlight veered right. By the time I was in 6th grade, I'd stopped expecting them to clap. I won a district writing contest and gave a speech at the awards ceremony. My parents didn't come. James had baseball. My dad said it gently. "You understand, right?" I said I did, but I didn't. Not really. Not yet. In high school, I tried harder. I became editor-in-chief of the school paper. I started submitting short stories to teen magazines. A few of them even got published. I came home once holding a copy of a glossy national magazine with my name in print. My mom looked up and smiled like she was humoring me. "That's cute," she said, "but make sure you're still focusing on real career stuff. You'd make a great nurse." They said it like writing was a fantasy, something for daydreamers. Never mind that James had just switched majors for the 3rd time and still got praise for being exploratory. When one of my pieces got accepted into a national anthology, real print, real distribution, I asked them if they wanted a copy. They didn't even answer. Meanwhile, James's college acceptance letters were printed and framed, hung like art in the living room. After a while, I stopped trying, not because I didn't believe in myself, but because the pain of being ignored hurt more than the effort was worth. I didn't want to beg for applause anymore. So I learned to clap for myself. I learned to work quietly. I took the scholarship they barely noticed and moved to New York. I got an internship, then a job, then another. I climbed and built and stretched myself into something real. And while they still called it that little office job, I started shaping an empire. They didn't ask, I didn't tell. But all of that silence, all of that being overlooked for years, it lived in me. It stayed there like a quiet hum, reminding me every day that I was invisible in their eyes, that no matter what I did, unless it was James level loud, I was nothing more than background noise. I became good at hiding what I built, at keeping my victories quiet. But it hurt. Deep down, it hurt to be the daughter who didn't be the child who could win state writing awards and hear, "That's nice, sweetie," while James got a standing ovation for showing up. And that night at dinner, when they laughed about how I probably just answer emails for a living, I realized something. They hadn't changed. They never would. And all that work I'd done, all the success I had, wouldn't matter to them unless someone else pointed it out, until someone said it loud enough that they had no choice but to listen. And that someone, surprisingly, was Laura. I ran to New York for college like my life depended on it, because in a way, it did. I needed miles between me and the version of myself my family had written for me. In New York, I didn't have to be just James's sister or Susan's disappointment. I could be Emily, just Emily, and for the first time that was enough. I found myself in lecture halls, in quiet corners of campus libraries, in coffee shops where I scribbled on napkins in cheap notebooks. My professors didn't just read my work, they believed in it. They circled paragraphs, made notes in the margins, urged me to submit to journals I'd never even dreamed of. Slowly, small wins started stacking up. A poem published here, a short story picked up there. Each acceptance was a little spark in a life that had only ever known cold shoulders. Back home, none of that mattered. Holidays felt like walking barefoot across broken glass. I'd sit at the dinner table listening to my mom brag about James's new business class, or the promotion he hadn't even earned yet. His girlfriend's boutique yoga business somehow became a family achievement worth toasting. And me? I got the same old line. "So, school's fine?" No one asked about my classes, my awards, my dreams. They didn't even pretend. I nodded, smiled, and tucked away every success like it was something shameful. Because why bother sharing? They'd just pat my head, change the subject, and remind me to be more practical. After college, I stayed in New York. I was determined to make it as a writer, even if it meant being broke. My mom laughed when I told her, "You'll be back in 6 months," she said, waving a manicured hand. "You'll see. Rent in New York isn't a joke." My dad tried to soften the blow. "Writing's tough, sweetheart. We just don't want you to be disappointed." That word, disappointed, like I hadn't carried the weight of their disappointment since I was 8 years old. So I smiled through the phone, then hung up and cried in my tiny apartment. New York chewed me up at first. I moved with 2 suitcases, a laptop, and a dream. I shared a Brooklyn apartment with 2 other creatives, one an aspiring actor, the other a visual artist. We split rent, toilet paper, and late-night breakdowns. I worked mornings at a cafe near Union Square, made lattes with shaky hands, then spent afternoons begging for work at publishing houses. At night, I wrote until my fingers cramped. Short stories, essays, fragments of characters I hadn't met yet. The rejection letters came fast, and I taped them to my wall like a road map. Each no meant I'd tried. Then came Margaret Wilson, senior editor at a small but respected literary magazine. She was sharp, no nonsense, and terrifying, but she read my work. And she didn't just compliment it, she challenged it. "You've got a voice," she said, flipping through my scribbled short story from a lunch break. "Raw, but real. You want coddling? Join a writing group. You want to publish? Toughen up." So I did. I rewrote everything. I listened. I grew. 2 years later, I landed my first piece in a major literary journal. Seeing my name in print felt like stepping into sunlight after years underground. But I didn't call home. I celebrated with friends who understood what it meant. From there, it snowballed. My name started popping up in places that once felt untouchable. Agents started reaching out. I spent 3 years pouring my heart into my first book, a collection of stories about family, grief, silence, and finding your voice. I called it Beneath Silent Waters. It sold. It didn't just sell, it soared. Critics called it a stunning debut. The New Yorker called me a quiet storm of a writer. I was published at 27. I toured 12 U.S. cities, then London, then Berlin. Readers wrote to me saying my words felt like their thoughts finally made sense on paper. People I had never met believed in me more than my own family ever did. I used the name Emily Carter, dropping my middle name, Anne. It helped keep my worlds apart. They never Googled me. They never checked. So my secret stayed safe. My second book, The Weight of Unsaid Things, was quieter in success, but deeper in reach. It climbed the bestseller lists 8 months after it was released. By 30, I had a top agent, a strong publisher, and a career most writers only dream about. I bought my own apartment, no roommates, no landlord peering through the blinds. My office was full of framed reviews, awards, book covers. I guest lectured at Columbia, spoke at NYU. And yet, whenever I flew home, I became the same invisible girl who'd been told her writing was a cute hobby. 3 months before that dinner, I got an email that changed everything. My novel had been optioned for a film, not just any film, a major studio, an Oscar-winning producer attached. I flew to LA, stayed in a hotel where the sheets felt like clouds, and sat in meetings where people called my work powerful. But still, I didn't tell my family. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't bear to see them shrug. I couldn't take another, "That's nice, Emily," as if I'd told them I bought new socks. So I kept my life split in two. There was New York Emily, bold, seen, celebrated, and there was Ohio Emily, the invisible daughter, the disappointment in practical shoes. And I lived in that split until one person, Laura, took out her phone and shattered it all with one Google search. The night of James and Laura's engagement dinner wasn't supposed to be about me, but it became the night everything cracked open. I pulled into my parents' driveway, that same quiet street in Westlake where the air always felt heavier than it should. The house hadn't changed. Mom's fresh flowers lined the porch, new curtains in the windows, everything dressed up just right for James's big moment. I parked behind a sleek BMW. Laura's, I assumed dad, met me at the door with his usual half-hug, awkward and stiff. "Everyone's in the living room," he said, same routine, same emotional distance. As I stepped inside, the walls were lined with family photos. James at Yale, James skiing in Colorado, James at last year's fundraiser. Not a single one of me. It wasn't surprising, just familiar. Mom's bright laugh echoed from the next room. When she saw me, her smile faded slightly. "Emily, you made it." James jumped up and pulled Laura toward me. "Emily, meet Laura." Laura was stunning, confident, kind eyes, stylish but warm. "I've heard so much about you," she said. "New York sounds amazing." I smiled, caught off guard by her tone. Then Mom chimed in with a soft snort. It wasn't mean, just enough to undercut. Dinner was set with the good china. Roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, James's favorite. Mom sat at the foot of the table like a queen. James and Laura were side by side. I was alone on the far end, like always. The conversation revolved around James's work, his wedding, Laura's impressive family. When Laura turned to me and asked, "What do you do in publishing?" I barely had time to breathe before Mom answered for me. "She works with books. Something small, not like James." I tried to clarify, but she moved on. Emily's always had her head in the clouds. She was the bookworm. We had to drag her outside. I faded again, just like I'd always done. Laura tried to include me, inviting me to be a bridesmaid. I was touched. But Mom rolled her eyes. If Emily can take time off her little job. James shifted uncomfortably. Laura asked again, "What are you working on? Anything we'd know?" I hesitated. I could have told them, but habit had trained me to downplay. Just normal stuff, I said. That's when Mom said it. Emily's just a nobody with an office job. The words didn't even sting, they landed like something expected. Routine. Laura blinked. Then, silently, she picked up her phone. As Mom kept talking about cake designs, Laura's eyes moved rapidly across her screen. Then her expression changed, curiosity, then shock. She glanced at me, lowered the phone, and finally said, "Emily, are you the Emily Carter, the author?" Everything stopped. Mom blinked. What? Laura held up her phone. My Penguin Random House profile glowed. Beneath silent waters, the weight of unsaid things. Penn/Faulkner Award. Is that you? My hands were shaking. Yes, I said. James leaned in. Wait. What? Laura went on. She's a best-selling author. Her novel's being adapted into a movie. She's been on the New Yorker's 40 under 40 list. She smiled. I read your first book for book club. I loved it. Mom went pale. Dad looked stunned. James just stared. Why didn't you tell us? He asked. I took a breath. I did. You didn't listen. I called when my first story got published. Mom changed the subject to your new car. I mailed copies of my book. I saw them in the guest room, still in the packaging. Dad frowned. I don't remember. Mom snapped. You should have made it clearer. Laura jumped in, softly. Her books are personal. The family stuff. It felt familiar. Mom stiffened. You wrote about us? I nodded. It's fiction. But yes, the feeling of being invisible, that's real. That's from here. Dad looked down. Some of these reviews, they talk about emotional neglect. My voice cracked. You had so much love for James, you just didn't save any for me. So I found it somewhere else. Mom grabbed the plates. I need to clear. Dad stopped her. Susan, sit. Listen to her. James reached across the table. I didn't know. I'm sorry. And for the first time they actually saw me. Dinner ended the way so many family moments used to, quiet, tense, unfinished. Mom stayed in the kitchen for most of it, clinking plates like she was scrubbing the discomfort away. Dad sat awkwardly, trying to act normal but clearly shaken. James hugged me before I left and whispered, "This is a start, right?" I nodded. It wasn't a resolution, but it was something. I drove back to my hotel that night, feeling lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of being unseen. A part of me dared to feel hope. 3 months later, I got a package at my Brooklyn apartment. It was from my dad. Inside were brand new copies of both my books Beneath Silent Waters and The Weight of Unsaid Things. He'd gone out and bought them. Not the signed ones I'd sent years ago, still unopened in a drawer back home, but fresh copies just for him. Tucked inside was a note in his shaky handwriting. Emily, I read Beneath Silent Waters twice. First for the story, second for your voice. I'm sorry I didn't listen sooner. You matter. Love, Dad. It hit harder than I expected. I cried alone on the floor, book in hand, knowing this time he'd actually heard me. Small shifts started to snowball. James and I started texting more. Then weekly calls, but real calls, not the stiff, polite ones. He asked about my new manuscript, a story about two estranged sisters who find their way back to each other. Sounds familiar, he joked. Then he asked me to read at his engagement party. I want people to know who my sister is. You're a badass author, Em. And when I showed up to the party, there it was again. Small things that felt big. Mom had moved my name to the main table. James winked and whispered, "That's huge. Like, groundbreaking." Turns out, Laura had helped too. She invited Mom to join her book club. The first book they read? Mine. Apparently Mom was terrified she'd say the wrong thing, but she went anyway. A week later, she told her bridge club that my book was being taught in a course at Ohio State. That wasn't totally true, but the fact that she said it, that was progress. At the engagement party, the backyard was strung with warm lights and folding chairs. Laura hugged me tight. James beamed. Mom looked nervous but calm. "You're at table 1, she said. Dad was already telling someone about my second book, pointing to the cover like a proud museum docent. When Mom introduced me, she didn't say, "My daughter in New York," or "the one who works in books." She said, "Emily, our daughter, the author." When I stood to read, I picked a passage from my first book. It was about finding your voice in a house that never taught you to speak. I watched as Mom's face shifted. Her eyes welled up. Afterwards, she touched my arm and said, "That was beautiful. I didn't know you could write like that." I looked at her and said gently, "You never asked." She nodded, blinking fast. "I'm asking now, better late than never?" I smiled. "Yeah, better late than never." Driving back to New York, I thought about all the years I spent aching to be seen, about how I had built an entire life out of silence, turned it into stories, pages, paragraphs that reached people my own family never did. I didn't write to prove them wrong, I wrote because it was the only way I knew how to survive. And yet, being seen by them now? It mattered more than I wanted to admit. James texted me the next morning. Dad gave your books to the guys at his golf club. Mom's freaking out about the bad words, says she might need to explain the literary context. I laughed, sitting at my desk with a coffee and that note from Dad still folded on the table. Progress is weird. It's messy and late and sometimes quiet, but it's still progress. They once called me a nobody, but I became somebody, not because Laura Googled me, not because of awards or press, but because I kept going, I kept writing, I kept believing my voice mattered, even when no one else did. And if you've ever been in that place, if you've ever been talked over, laughed at, brushed aside, just know this: your story matters, your voice matters, and when they finally see you, it won't change who you are, but it will remind you that you were always worth seeing. So, have you ever been underestimated? How did it feel when they finally saw who you really are? Drop it in the comments, and if this hit home, you know what to do.